Good morning. If you know me, then you know I love books and I love reading. I buy books faster than I can read them, and no, it's not hoarding, it's a collection. That's what I say, I collect books. With so many amazing unread books, you would think that I wouldn't want to reread any, but there are a couple that I turn to time and time again. My favorite book, aside from Harry Potter, of course, is a novel called The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. It's also probably my mom's least favorite book. She doesn't understand why I love it so much. It's kind of dark. The Sparrow is science fiction, and it takes place in the future when life is discovered on a planet in another solar system. The Society of Jesus decides to send a group of 4 Jesuit priests, a Hasidic Jew, 2 agnostics, and an atheist, on a spaceship to travel to this planet and make contact with the life forms there. I love this book because it is beautifully written. Russell is a very talented writer. And because it doesn't shy away from asking tough theological questions like, where is God in the midst of suffering? And does God abandon us when we suffer? The Jesuits' mission starts off so well. Things go mostly according to plan, and they have good and honorable intentions. But in the end, their good intentions aren't enough, and after some unavoidable misunderstandings, things go horribly, horribly wrong. Father Emilio Sandoz is the only one who makes the return trip to Earth and has to tell the tale. Near the end of the book, when Emilio has finished telling his story and the whole awful truth of what happened has finally come out, the Jesuits who heard Emilio's story are discussing what happened and what role God played in it. They're trying to make sense of it all. Here is part of that conversation. There's an old Jewish story that says, in the beginning, God was everywhere and everything, a totality. But to make creation, God had to remove himself from some part of the universe so something besides himself could exist. So we breathed in, and the places where God withdrew, there creation exists. So God just leaves? John asked, angry where Emilio had been desolate. Abandons creation? You're on your own, apes. Good luck. No. He watches, he rejoices, he weeps. He observes the moral drama of human life and gives meaning to it by caring passionately about us and remembering. Matthew 10, verse 29, Vincenzo Giuliani said quietly, "Not one sparrow can fall to the ground without your Father knowing it." But the sparrow still falls, Philippe said. The sparrow still falls. I love that quote. I think it's very powerful and moving. God doesn't abandon us. God rejoices when we rejoice and weeps when we weep. Not a sparrow falls without God knowing, but the sparrow still falls. We still fall. But God is with us when we do, even if it doesn't feel like it. This has been a tough year for all of us. The pandemic has hurt everyone, some more than others, of course, but still, we have all been impacted. We've lost loved ones to COVID. We've lost our jobs. We had to quarantine in our homes and couldn't see our family or friends for months. We started working from home and going to school and church virtually, forcing us to learn new technologies. As a country, we have faced racial injustice and a divisive election. It's been a tough year, and our mental health has suffered because of it. Coming out of the pandemic, it is important now more than ever to break the silence around mental illness. Normally, we can say about 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 people in the United States have a diagnosable mental illness. The statistics change slightly every year, but it's typically somewhere around 20 to 25% of adults. The CDC has reported that as of February 2021, just a couple months ago, that number has gone up to 2 in 5 people, or 40% of the adult population. 40%. That means about 40% of the people in this room and about 40% of the people watching online are struggling with their mental health. Are you one of them? I know I am. In fact, I'm willing to bet that everyone here and everyone watching from home either has a mental illness or knows someone who does. It's one of those things that affects everyone. It affects all of us. You are not alone. Despite the prevalence of mental illness and despite our increased understanding of it and our ability to treat it, there is still a lot of stigma in our society regarding mental illness. This is especially true in the church. Some people think that as Christians, it's not okay to be depressed or anxious or to struggle with mental health in any way. They think that if we have enough faith, if we fully and completely trust and depend on God, then we wouldn't be depressed or anxious. And with that point of view, having a mental illness becomes an indication of a lack of faith or even sin. But that's not true. Having a mental health condition is not a character flaw. It does not mean you're a bad Christian, and it does not mean you don't have enough faith. It just means you're human, and this is part of the hand you've been dealt. Just like we all have physical health and need to take care of it, we all have mental health and need to take care of it. Sometimes our bodies get sick and needs extra help, so we go to a doctor. And sometimes our minds aren't well and need some extra help, so we go to a therapist or a psychiatrist. We tend to want to spiritualize mental illness, and even if we acknowledge that Christians struggle with lots of things, including physical health, that we shouldn't suffer from mental health. So even though we wouldn't criticize someone for taking treatment for cancer, for some reason we feel like it's okay to criticize people for taking treatment for mental health. This needs to change. I've been in therapy for over half my life now, and I've accepted it as something that I will always do as part of my self-care. There have been a couple of periods in my adult life when I wasn't in therapy. The first was when I moved to Chicago to go to seminary. Telehealth wasn't common back then like it is now, thanks to COVID. So I had to stop seeing my therapist, who I had been going to at least once a month since high school. Finding a therapist that's a good fit is hard, and I just didn't want to deal with that while also being in a new city and going to grad school and all of that. I figured I would know when it was time to start therapy again. But after a year, my depression just kind of snuck up on me. Towards the beginning of my second year, I walked into a friend's office, and she said, "How are you?" And I said I was fine. She said, "Are you sure? Because you look like you're about to cry." And I just burst into tears. She was right, I wasn't fine, and I was often on the verge of tears. I don't remember all the circumstances that were causing my depression that time, but there was a lot going on in my life, and I was overwhelmed, depressed, and anxious. My friend knew about my history with depression and anxiety, so she was surprised to find out that I didn't have a therapist at the time and told me I needed to get one. I realized she was right, and it was in fact time to go back to therapy, so I did. Moving back to Michigan after graduating from seminary was the second time I was without a therapist. Again, I didn't want to deal with moving, starting a new job, and finding a therapist I liked. So I held off and decided to pay better attention this time so that I would know when it was time to start therapy again. And I did. Less than a year later, I noticed the symptoms of depression and anxiety cropping up again, so I sought out a new therapist, the same one I see today. And don't worry, next time I move, I'll be able to keep my therapist because we'll continue to meet virtually. I won't have to go through another big life change without the support of a therapist. I thank God for my therapist, my psychiatrist, and the medications I take. I wouldn't be here today without them, and I know God put them in my life when I needed them. We often feel the need to pretend that everything is fine, even when it isn't. We see our friends post on social media about their great lives, and we feel like we need to keep up appearances and act like our lives are just as wonderful. But the truth is, we all need help sometimes. Help from God, from professionals, and from each other. This is my passion for ministry. I want to make church a place where people feel free to be their true, authentic selves without having to hide any part of themselves, including their struggles with mental health. I want to help churches become more welcoming and supportive of people with mental illness and their families, and I want to reduce the stigma in the church surrounding mental illness. I want people to know that they are loved by God and their community no matter what. This is my calling. This is the work God has called me to do as a deacon. As Pastor Anthony said, deacons have specialized area of ministries, and mine is mental health ministry. And I thank you so much for supporting my call to ministry all these years. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to reach out and ask for help when we need it. Not a sparrow falls without God knowing, but the sparrow still falls. We fall too, and God is right there with us, ready to help pick us back up when we do. Amen.